3, 2, 1.
Hello, and welcome to the Fighting Moose Podcast. I'm your host and narrator, Jason Hendrickson. This is a podcast where I retell stories, some fictional and some historical, that can be enjoyed by people of all ages. Hopefully you are enjoying this story, The Christmas Reindeer, written by Thornton W. Burgess. I know I have said it a million times, but Mr. Burgess is one of my favorite authors, and reading his stories always makes me happy, and reading them is never a chore. If you're like me, and this doesn't happen very often, but sometimes reading feels like a chore, especially if the material is dry, or hard to digest, or is super technical in nature. Mr. Burgess is neither of those. Now, let's turn to today's story. I hope you enjoy. Let's begin.
Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Chapter 15. The First Reindeer. Mr. and Mrs. Caribou were the first of all the caribou to make their home in the far north, and they loved it. Old Mother Nature had told them truly that they would find plenty of food. So they and their children and their children's children took possession of all the great land where the snow lay most of the year. They found the moss, which you like so well, my son, said his mother. They found the moss, and they found that it was best in winter. It isn't true moss, you know, but is called reindeer moss by everybody. In the summer, they lived on grass and other plants, just as we do. So in time, 3 became very many caribou, and they lived in peace, for it was long before others came to live in the land of snow. But there came a time when these 2-legged creatures called men appeared. They were hunters, and they hunted the caribou. They needed the meat for food, and the skins for clothing, and to make their tents. So the caribou became necessary to men. Then one day, the hunters surrounded a band of caribou and captured alive all the fawns and young caribou. These they kept watch over and protected from the wolves and the bears, which had by this time come to live in the Northland. And because there were no wise old deer to protect these young deer, the young deer did not try to run away. They were content to graze near the homes of the hunters. In time, they grew and had fawns of their own, and these grew and the herd increased. And these, my son, were the first reindeer. They were necessary to man if he would live in the far north, and they found that man was necessary to them. They furnished man with food and clothing. From their antlers he made tools. Man furnished them protection and found the best feeding grounds for them, so that they lived better and more contentedly than their cousins, the wild caribou, for the latter had always by day and night to be on the watch for enemies. Then one day a boy fastened a halter to a pet deer and fastened him so that he could not stray away. In time, that deer became used to the halter and to being fastened. Then the boy built a sled. It wasn't such a nice sled as the sleds of today, because you know this was the first sled of its kind. Then he fastened the deer to the sled, and with a long line fastened to the halter on each side of the deer's head, so that he might guide him, the boy climbed on top of the sled. Of course, that deer was frightened, and he ran. By and by, the sled upset, but the boy still held the reins. This was the first reindeer to be driven by man. The boy's father had seen all that happened. He built a better sled, and he and the boy trained that deer and other deer. Then, with these deer, they made long journeys, so it was that the reindeer became of still more use to man. "But I don't want to be harnessed and driven and have to drag a sled," said Little Spot. "That shows your lack of wisdom, my son," replied his mother. "The deer who best draw the sleds are the deer that are cared for best, and will live longest. Other deer are killed for food and for their skins, but not the deer who draw the sleds. Those are the deer that are thought most of, and it is my hope that you will one day be the finest sled deer in all the herd. Who knows, perhaps you may be chosen in the Valley of the Good Spirit to be one of the 8 deer who once in the early winter of each year carry the Good Spirit on a wonderful journey out into the great world that he may spread love and happiness. Do you remember, my son, how on the day we left the Valley of the Good Spirit, all we mother deer and all you youngsters stood while the finest bucks and all the herd milled around us? And how every once in a while they stopped? Little Spot bobbed his head. "I remember," said he. "Each time they stopped," replied his mother, "the Good Spirit chose one of their number to be added to his team for that wonderful journey out into the great world. They become magic deer just for a little while at a time that men folk call Christmas. They become magic deer, and all the children of the great world love them, though they have never seen them. So, my son, be wise in the wisdom of the deer folk. Be not unruly, should it be that you are chosen to draw the sled of a man, for it is only the best sled deer that are chosen by the Good Spirit and become the Christmas deer for that magic journey into the great world. Now, we must be getting back to the herd, or those wolves may get upon our trail." Little Spot trotted beside his mother, Big Spot, over the snow-covered prairie, and as he trotted, he thought deeply of all his mother had told him. And as he thought, his eyes were opened, so that by the time they reached the big herd, Little Spot was no longer a willful young deer. He no longer thought that he knew all there was to know, but he did his very best to try to learn all there was for a wise deer to know. And you know, when one tries to learn, it is surprisingly easy. So, from being the most willful and unruly of all the young deer, Little Spot became the most obedient and the best mannered. Chapter 16. Little Spot and Tuk-Tuk Dream. Do you ever have daydreams? If you do, you know that they are made up partly of wishes, partly of plans, and partly of the same sort of stuff that sleep dreams are made of. Tuk-Tuk was very busy these winter days. She was very busy indeed, as were all the Eskimo girls and their mothers. What do you think she was doing? You never would guess. She was chewing. Yes, sir, she was chewing. And it wasn't gum that she was chewing either, although she dearly loved to chew gum when she got the chance. She was chewing skins. What's that? You think I am fooling? I'm not. Tuk-Tuk was chewing skins. Tuk-Tuk was making boots for her brother and her father. They were made of skin, and Tuk-Tuk was chewing this in order to soften it and make it workable. But as she chewed, and later as she sewed, making the skin clothing for herself and for her brother and father, she did a great deal of dreaming. Perhaps you can guess what she dreamed of. It was Santa Claus. She didn't call him Santa Claus, even to herself. She still called him the Good Spirit. I think myself that is rather a beautiful name for Santa Claus. And it wasn't of things that she wanted Santa Claus to bring her that Tuk-Tuk dreamed. It was of helping Santa Claus. It seemed to her that nothing in all the great world would be so good or make her so happy as to help the Good Spirit spread the message of love and good cheer and happiness to all the little children less fortunate than she. Now, this is going to surprise you. Tuk-Tuk actually thought that she lived in the finest part of all the great world, and she was sorry for little boys and girls who lived where there were no reindeer and where snow and ice were seldom found. She was sorry for boys and girls who had never ridden behind a fast-trotting deer. Yes, Tuk-Tuk thought she lived in the very best part of all the great world, and she loved it. And she wished somehow that she could help Santa, the Good Spirit, when he carried happiness and joy to all the great world. Sometimes when she dreamed, she would forget to chew the skin that she was at work on, and her mother would greatly remind her that the boots were needed. She wondered if she could make a pair of boots for the good spirit, and then her face grew warm with shame at her boldness. How could anyone even think of doing anything for the good spirit? For could not the good spirit have all things he desired? And then she remembered something. She remembered that the good spirit had said that those chosen deer ought to be good sled deer because of the time he spent training them. Supposing she and Aklak could get the deer trained so well beforehand that the good spirit would not have to spend time in training them. Perhaps then he could start earlier. Then she sighed, for how could she be sure the good spirit would choose the deer she and Aklak trained? And while Tuktu dreamed her daydreams as she worked, Little Spot, the finest young deer in all the herd, was dreaming daydreams. And the queer part of it is, his dreams were very like the dreams of Tuktu. He dreamed of being a magic deer. He dreamed of being one of that team of magic deer with which the good spirit made his wonderful journey out into the great world each Christmas. And because he remembered what his mother had said, he tried very hard to be what a young deer should be, for he hoped that in time he would be chosen for a sled deer. Perchance if he were chosen for a sled deer and became the best sled deer in all the great herd, he might some day be chosen in the valley of the good spirit. So he did his best to grow strong and handsome, and to be the swiftest footed, for he had discovered that it was the strongest, handsomest, and swiftest deer that were chosen to draw the sleds of the herders. But there was one big difference in the dreaming of these two young dreamers. Tuktu had no thought of self, whereas Little Spot was thinking chiefly of his own glory. He had no thought of others, but only great ambition for himself. There are many people like Little Spot in this great world. Now, I don't want you to think that Tuktu spent all her time chewing and sewing skins. That was work which could be done when the great storms and the bitter cold kept her indoors. She had her playtime as well as her working time, and there were many happy hours spent with Aklak, helping him herd the deer, for she dearly loved the deer people, and they loved her. Even the wildest of them, and the most unruly, would allow Tuktu to approach and even to pet them. Aklak was growing to be a very fine herder. His father, Kutok, said that Aklak would one day be the best herder in all the Northland. But not even Aklak understood the deer as did Tuktu.
Listen, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Fighting Moose Podcast. Please join us next time as we read another exciting story. Today's music was provided by the artist Analog by Nature, and the audio clips were provided from NASA. For more information to download and or listen to audio or materials from all our recordings, or to contact us, please visit www.thefightingmoose.com, or you can follow the links in the show notes. If you enjoy the podcast, please leave us a review wherever you get your podcast or on iTunes, and tell a friend. Thank you for your patronage, and as always, try and do a random act of kindness every day.
Mission complete, Houston. After serving the world for over 30 years, the space shuttle turned its place in history and has come to a final stop.